Okay, so this is the Bible study for Genesis chapter 21, verses 1 through 21. And the text for today says, Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, Do not be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. All right. So remember, you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And we're going to continue to study this text. Let's go ahead and pray as we get started. Dear God, we're so grateful for this day. We're so thankful for your word and how you speak to us, and that you have not given up on us, and that you even look over the things that we have done, and you find ways to bless us when we follow you. Despite what we've done wrong, despite our past, Lord, you can transform our future. And so we invite you to speak to us through this text and begin or continue the work of transforming our future, no matter what we've done in the past. We praise you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. So number one says what has happened up to now in Genesis, and I'll just be honest. There was answers under this question, but there was just too much for the page, and I had to cut out some of these answers. But I know usually we review last week's Bible study, but last week's Bible study was about Abraham lying that Sarah was his sister and not his wife again. And I think it's even more important that we kind of go back and remember that God has promised Abraham a son, that the reason that Ishmael and Hagar are a problem in this text or an issue in this text is because of Sarah's idea for Abraham to take things into his own hands and sleep with the maidservant and try to fulfill the promise because they didn't have their faith and their trust in God that He could fulfill that promise. Remember that when the three men came to Abraham, which um, eventually two of them went down to Lot in Sodom and were the messengers by which God proclaimed the destruction of Sodom and delivered Lot out of it. Um, we don't want to talk about all that story that much. We don't want to remember that. But remember that when those three men were there with Abraham, they reinforced the promise that there would be a child and that it would be Sarah's child and that it would happen within the next year. So when it says this happened just at the time that Abraham was promised, that's when we had that time frame. So, kind of understanding all that's come up to now, probably not just last week's Bible study, is helpful. If you've been with us through the study, then this isn't news to you, but I'm aware that people kind of come in at different points while we're studying text, especially in a book like Genesis, when we're going to be studying for probably over a year. People sort of join our church or come in and start Bible study with us, and maybe they haven't been here for the whole lead up. So we want to remember that that this is sort of the culmination of promises and lots of stories up to now, and not just an all of a sudden thing. So number 2 says, what do we learn in 21, 1 and 2? It says the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and he as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God had promised him. So that's what I referred to just a moment ago. So that's what's happening here. Number 3, what name did Abraham give to his son of the promise who has finally come? Now, I just want to say names were very significant in that time. Names meant something. Names were not given. I remember when we were naming our children. Um, we had a book of names this thick. Probably there were names in there from all different lineages or cultural backgrounds. It told us what the most popular names of the year were, which actually, although Ethan was pretty popular around that time, we tried to steer away from the most popular names because that's how you end up having to be called by something other than your name because there's 15 Davids or 15 Johns or apparently Ethans, because at one time there was 3 Ethans on our Ethan's soccer team all at once. So when we got to Brennan, we had a more rare name, and we chose it at least in part. Although I found out my wife didn't realize this until just weeks ago, but at least in part because I had a friend in college whose name was Brennan, and I liked the name. Um, and we had went over a couple of different names, and in fact, and also there's a similarity between my mom's name Brenda, and who her sister sometimes calls Bryn. So there was some things there, and we almost called him Brennan Matthew, um, which is actually my uncle's um, middle name that he goes by, Matthew. But that seemed weird because Bryn and Matthew, anyway, so we called him Brennan Joseph. And Ethan's middle name is Jacob, spelled with a Y, Jaycob, because that's his uncle's name. And so we spelled his name that way in honor of his uncle. Um, and so we liked that name too. Um, so anyway, um, lots of good reasons for naming people. I think my sister's name is Jamie because um, my dad wanted somebody named after him, and they didn't name their first son after him, so his name was James, and so they named their my sister after him, Jamie. Um, all the reasons, those seem like pretty normal reasons for us to name our kids today. That's not the way they named kids in Abraham's time, or fast forward into the time of Israel. In fact, Israel himself was named Jacob, and his name changed to Israel because of an incident in his life that God gave him a new name, and so we know that in that happens sometimes, that somebody received a name that was sort of an honorary name because of something that happened or their character or whatever. So Jacob was the heel grabber, or sometimes said the usurper, because he came out second among twins, grabbing his brother's heel, but also in the long run, he took his brother's birthright. And so we haven't got to that part of Genesis yet. But when he was renamed Israel, it was because he was the one who wrestles with God. Um, so all that is to say that I've listed a few different names here, which are obviously not. I mean, I don't think anybody reads the text and is confused and thinks, "Oh, they named their kid Joshua." But let me just say that all of these names have meanings and are sort of at least somewhat well known in Scripture, and so it's more to make the point that we need to look at the reason for the name, and what is Abraham naming his child. So Joshua means the Lord saves, um, and actually is also the same sort of root name as Jesus. Jesus means the Lord saves. So Joshua was an Old Testament character with that name, um, that that was sort of the salvation of Israel in some ways. He led them into the promised land. Jesus, we know why Jesus would be called that. Asher, this is a great name. Asher means blessed, and wouldn't we all want that name? Of course, Ben Ami. No, we don't want to talk about that one. That was the one that meant son of my father. That's a good throwback to a couple chapters ago when we were talking about Lot and his daughters. And then D, which is obviously the right, uh, the true one, Isaac, meaning one who laughs or one who rejoices, but we all know where this name came from. So Sarah apparently enjoys irony. And so Sarah and Abraham both laughed when God promised that they would have a son. And so then when they had a son, um, they called him Isaac, the one who laughs, or perhaps the one who brought laughter. And Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said that Abraham to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne this son in my old age. So now I'm going to give her a little credit and suggest that maybe this had multiple meanings. Certainly, she says, God has brought me laughter, and everybody that hears about this is going to laugh with me. And that seems sort of ironic. She laughed, and that wasn't necessarily a good thing when she laughed when God told her what he was going to do. But then she's making sort of a good thing of it and said, now I'm laughing and I'm rejoicing. And everybody who hears this is going to realize how funny this is. And by the way, unlike us, everybody who heard the name in their time would have said, you named him Laughter. What's that about? And they would have said, yeah, we're 100 years old, or Abraham is, and we had a baby. And man, we didn't even think God could do that, and he did it, and we laughed when he said he was going to do it. And then we found ourselves laughing that he had done it, and perhaps even rejoicing. So I want to give her some credit, but these names, just, I get a kick out of these names and how on the nose they are. Of course, I could have went to the book of Hosea and talked to you about how Hosea named his children, which all had, many of the names had to do with their mom's unfaithfulness, which was not ideal, growing up with that name, I'm sure. Um, so anyway, but let's just consider um, that Abraham and Sarah seem to appreciate the irony, that they had laughed when God said he was going to do something. He did it. They found themselves laughing that it had happened and probably rejoicing as well. And then they named their son Laughter, or Rejoicing. Um, so then number 4 says, what did Sarah say in 21 through 6 through 7? I've already said this. God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham and Sarah that Sarah would nurse children? I think the answer is God. He's the one who said that, and you laughed. So it wasn't, somebody said it, and you thought that was funny, but God came through. Um, Perhaps that entire, even reflecting on the name, would be sort of a reminder of what God does even when we doubt what he can do. And perhaps there's some sort of positive memorial in that name that would bring thoughts about God's power and his faithfulness. Give her some credit. But it does seem funny that she named her son Laughter, essentially. Um, Number 5, what happened in 21:8 through 10? Isaac was weaned, and on that day Abraham held a great feast. B, Sarah uh, saw that Hagar's son was mocking. And Sarah told Abraham to get rid of Hagar and her son, for he will never share in the inheritance with Isaac. This kind of sounds familiar. So she's already sent Hagar away once. Now she sends her away again, um, where she makes Abraham send her away. Number 6, what happens in 21:11 through 13? This distressed Abraham greatly, so he wasn't excited about this idea. This is his son after all, and she wants to do away with. By the way, when this all happened, we said this is not a great idea. Those of you that have navigated blended families, and particularly when you've tried to navigate blended families or separated families, when not everybody in the picture is serving God, and there's a lot of selfishness and bitterness and jealousy, then you know that it is for our own good that God has told us we should have one spouse, and because the complexities of blended families are very difficult to navigate. So I know a lot of people in the church, people of God, who are navigating that, and they're navigating it in for the most part, in many cases, now as believers, though they were not believers when the circumstances were set in motion, perhaps, for them to end up with a blended family. Um, there are, I think, great books and great seminars and sort of thoughts about how to navigate that in our Christian walk, because I do think that first of all, God redeems us. He redeems everything. He redeems our families. He redeems. So no matter what our past has been and the decisions that we've made, blended families can be an incredible blessing where God is filling with a godly parent, um, where there was a lack of parenting because of past decisions and mistakes. Um, and so they can be, God works through them. I definitely believe that, but I also think that um, all of us who are honest would honestly note that it creates additional challenges. And if somebody happened to be a jealous person, a selfish person, they might do something like what Sarah does here, and demand that the child that's not mine be sent away. Uh, and the mother that, um, is under our care be sent away. Of course, that's probably a different cultural situation than we find ourselves in pretty often today. But um, so anyway, all kinds of reasons why it's a bad idea to set these things in motion if we can avoid it. If we're serving God in the times, then one woman, one man, children together is the plan. Certainly, I think God has great plans for foster care and adoption and all sorts of things that ultimately are trying to redeem mankind despite our sin, whether it be ours or someone else's. So, anyway, all that thought is just we can see again that this is not great. Um, so, number seven, what? Well, maybe I didn't get to the bottom of this. Number six. God comforted Abraham and gave him instructions to do what Sarah says, which is a surprise. But basically, God says, I got this. I'm taking care of them. It'll be okay. God confirms that Isaac is to be the heir. And then D, God promises to take care of Ishmael and make him also into a great nation because he is Abraham's offspring. Number seven, what happened in 21:14 through 16? Abraham sent them away with some food and a skin of water, which just doesn't seem like much when he has all that he has, but um, God said he would take care of them. Um, Hagar wandered into the desert. Yes. See, when the water was gone, she set the boy under a bush and went about a bow shot away because she could not bear to watch him die. And she, or the child, or both, began to sob. So in my translation, it says she began to sob, but it has a footnote that notes that it is possible because of the way it was written in the original language that the translation should have been that the boy begins to sob. Um, the verses after that all refer to God hearing the boy crying, not necessarily Hagar. Um, but um, it's also it's in my opinion likely that they were both crying. Um, if you set your child under a bush to die and then you go a bow shots away so you don't have to watch, who's going to be crying? Both of you. So I'm pretty sure that it's all semantics at that point of what that was supposed to say. They're both crying. I'm quite confident. Number 8, what happened in 21:17 through 21? A, God heard the boy crying. B, the angel of God told her not to be afraid because God has heard the crying. Remember that God encountered Hagar the first time she was sent away, or she ran away, I guess. Um, and and she named God the one who sees me. Um, and he sees her or hears them again. And she is reassured that God knows what's going on in her life. And I thought that was a good reminder. C, God promises her that he will make the boy into a great nation, so he's not going to die here. And then D, God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin and gave the boy a drink. Now, this is an interesting. So the question is, I mean, at least the question that comes into my mind is, was the well there and she didn't see it, or did God make a well appear? Now, I believe God is all powerful and could very well have made a well appear where there was no well. And so I think most people upon first reading, if they have strong faith, would probably assume that God made a well appear. And he took care of her by creating a well where there was no well. And I'm okay with that interpretation. I believe that God can do that. I believe it's very possible that he did do that. Um, but in my own spiritual walk, in my own experience, I will say that many times when I'm distraught and I'm afraid and I'm perhaps a little angry and I feel alone, I get so wrapped up in myself that um, I don't see the answers around me that God has already given. And it takes hearing from God to open my eyes. And I think about the prophet later on in scripture that said, those that are for us, he was being surrounded, him and his servant were being surrounded by the armies. And he says, don't worry, those that are for us are greater than those that are against us. And the servant says, I don't see anybody. So God prays that this, or God prays that the prophet prays to God that the servant's eyes would be open, and he saw the angel armies, which is a good song too, around him, and realized that what the prophet was saying was true, that God was protecting them with an army of his own, and and so that was sort of a supernatural thing that God opened the servant's eyes to. But I think in my experience, in my life, God has often opened my eyes to solutions that should have been obvious from the beginning. And the only reason they weren't obvious is because I was so wrapped up in my own pain, my own fear, my own frustration that I was um, not seeing what God put in front of me, not hearing the opportunities. And so I don't want to make this sort of all about me doing things in my own flesh. Like if I just hadn't been so selfish, um, then I would have seen him. But I didn't even like as if I didn't need God, because I do believe sometimes we absolutely needed God to be able to see those, and it was the selfishness that stopped us from seeking God or asking God, show me the solutions that you already have for me. And so I believe, one, that sometimes it requires stopping and spending time in prayer and saying, God, I know that you have a plan for me, so show me the solutions that I can't see. And he'll tell us to look in a place we would have never looked on our own, for instance. But occasionally he tells us to open our eyes and look at the thing right in front of us that we didn't see. And what would have happened? So I also think, one, I think sometimes we need to stop and pray and seek God and ask His for His vision, for His how He sees the situation, for us to see the solutions that He sees. Asking Him where to look. But sometimes I think if we had been sort of that needs to be we needed to, instead of when the crisis hit go to prayer, we needed to be in prayer in the morning that morning, and our thought process and our prayers should have been, God, as I go through my day today, help me to see the things that you see. Help me to see the places that you would have me look for solutions for my problems today. And I sometimes wonder if we had that prayer at the beginning of the day instead of when we get into crisis, that our eyes would already be open looking for those opportunities as God guides us. And so I, I want to say it's entirely legitimate to go to prayer in crisis. Um, but I think sometimes we spend time, our advice as pastors to our congregations and our advice to one another as Christians is, when the crisis comes, go to prayer. He has the answers. And I think sometimes our advice should have been, if you go to prayer every day, if that's how you begin your day, if that's how you set off your day, then your eyes are already going to be looking for God's direction and the things that He has for you. And maybe we wouldn't have to have those sort of crisis moments of prayer near as often if we already were setting our eyes, sort of tuning them to Jesus's channel, if you will. But nonetheless, here is a well that either was not there before or she did not see before because she was convinced she was going to die and she wasn't even looking for how God was going to provide for her. And so I think believing that God is all powerful and could have created the well right there is really important to our faith. But the truth is, the number of times God has created wells for me in my time of need seems to be far fewer than the times He has shown me a well that was there all the time, but I was too depressed, discouraged, afraid, self-centered to see it until I asked Him to open my eyes, or till I asked Him for help and He did open my eyes, however you want to say that. Um, so, there are definitely times when God has gone before me and has paved a way, um, that may not have been there if I didn't go to prayer, and He created that way. So I'll say that too. Number 9, what does the story tell us in 21, 20, and 21? God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. Um, so this is sort of and they lived happily ever after part. It tells us what happens after that and how God provides. It's certainly not the end of the story, and I'm not sure happily ever after is the best way to describe it, but that's kind of what happened after this. So number 10 says, do we remember that the name that Hagar gave God previously? And I already mentioned that, the one who sees me. What does this story suggest about God's care for us in times of desperation? He's there. He still sees us. He still hears our crying. He hears our pain. That's we can go forward to Moses and the burning bush, and God said, I have heard the cries of my people. God hears us. God sees us. Um, and he has a path for us if we would just listen to him. And I think that's the key.